I still remember the exact smell of that afternoon. It was sugar frosting, warm balloons, and burnt coffee. People always think the worst moments arrive with thunder or sirens. Mine came under pastel paper lanterns hanging from my grandson's birthday banner, while a room full of relatives clapped and laughed as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I was 72 years old when my family tried to hand me a cup of coffee that was supposed to solve more than one problem. They thought I was just an old man, tired, slow, easy to fool. They thought if they smiled wide enough and laughed loud enough, I would swallow whatever they gave me and never ask questions. What they did not know was that my grandson had begged me 3 weeks earlier to let him put a little camera in the corner of the living room for his birthday party. He said he wanted to make a movie of the fun. That was Ethan for you, always acting like life was a story worth keeping. So there it was, tucked high on a shelf between a glass vase and a framed photo of my late wife, angled just enough to catch the whole room. That tiny camera recorded the way my daughter-in-law smiled when she handed me the cup. It recorded the way my son looked away. It recorded the way the others laughed when I said I didn't want any coffee. And it recorded the exact second I realized that the people I had loved the longest had stopped seeing me as a father and grandfather and started seeing me as an obstacle. I should tell you how it got that far. I should tell you how a birthday party, of all things, turned into the night my family cracked open like rotten wood and showed me what was inside. But to understand that afternoon, you have to understand the year before it. You have to understand the house. My wife Helen and I had built that house 28 years earlier, nail by nail, from the ground up, on a piece of land outside Dayton, Ohio. We were not rich people. We never were. I worked construction. Helen taught 4th grade. We drove used cars, patched our own roof, and took vacations that mostly involved fishing by the lake and sleeping in a cabin with bad plumbing. But that house, the one with the wide front porch and the red oak floors, was ours in a way nothing else in life had ever been ours. Every board in it carried a memory. Ethan taking his first steps in the hallway. Helen burning 3 pans of lasagna in the kitchen because she was laughing too hard at my terrible jokes. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere and the smell of cinnamon rolls filling the air. After Helen passed away, I stayed in that house alone. That's the part people misunderstand about grief. They think the sadness is the loudest thing. It is not. The loudest thing is the silence after the sadness has already worn you thin. The refrigerator hummed. The pipes clicked. The old clock in the hallway kept time like it was mocking me. I would sit in my chair by the window and watch the same maple tree shed the same leaves, and I would think, this house remembers her more clearly than I do. Ethan, my only son, visited often at first. He brought his wife, Vanessa, and their little boy, Ethan's son, my grandson, every few weekends. Vanessa always smiled with her teeth, but not her eyes. She was the type who made every room feel like a performance review. She had a polished look to her, expensive nails, sharp heels, and a voice so pleasant it almost hid the edge underneath. Ethan used to be different. He was a quiet boy, sensitive. He cried at movies and rescued injured birds and asked too many questions about how engines worked. When he was 12, he told me he wanted to be the kind of man who takes care of people. I remember exactly how proud Helen was when he said that. But pride is a fragile thing. Life does what it always does. Bills stack up. Dreams get smaller. People get embarrassed by the lives they've built and start reaching for someone else's. That was Ethan in his 30s. He wanted better, faster, more. At first I thought that was normal. Every parent thinks that if their child is ambitious, it means they are growing. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it only means they are looking at your life and deciding it is too small for them. Vanessa had money on her side, or at least she came from a family that liked to act like it did. Her father ran a chain of auto shops. Her mother liked to remind everyone they had connections. Not the kind of family that shows up with casseroles, the kind that shows up with invoices. When Ethan married her, I tried to be generous. I told myself I was old-fashioned, maybe too stubborn. Maybe I didn't understand their way of doing things. So I bit my tongue when Vanessa corrected my grammar in front of guests. I smiled when she rearranged my kitchen because she said it looked dated. I even gave her the good silverware Helen had saved for special occasions, because I thought a little kindness would make her see that she had married into a family that cared about things money could not replace. I was wrong. The first real crack came after Helen's will was settled. She had left most everything to me, as she had always planned, but she had also set up a trust for Ethan and eventually for Ethan's son, my grandson. Nothing extravagant. Enough to help with school, perhaps a business, a house someday. Helen had been careful. She believed in making sure the next generation had a foundation without handing them a throne. That trust became the bone they kept staring at. Ethan started calling more often after the paperwork was finalized. At first, he said it was just concern. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone out there," he said one night. "The house is too big for one person." I told him I liked the space. He said, "You're getting older. You need help." I told him I was 71. Not dead. He laughed, a little too quickly. "That's not what I meant." Vanessa was always somewhere in the background of those calls, her voice faint but present, like a hand on the back of his neck. Soon they came by with brochures for senior communities. Then they came by with a realtor's business card. Then they came by with concern so thick it felt sticky. "We could make the property easier for you," Vanessa said one Sunday at dinner, pressing a napkin to her lips with perfect composure. "Sell the house, move closer to us, maybe somewhere with less maintenance. You could enjoy your retirement instead of worrying about roof repairs and stairs." "It's my house," I said. She smiled gently. "Of course. No one is saying otherwise." But Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the thing I noticed. He never argued directly. He started going quiet at all the wrong moments, as if he hoped silence would do the dirty work for him. A month later, he told me he and Vanessa had been looking into options because their mortgage was getting harder to manage. He said Ethan had been laid off from a sales job. He said daycare was expensive. He said the pressure was killing Vanessa's blood pressure. He said a lot of things that were meant to lead to one sentence, and that sentence was this: "Dad, maybe it would make sense if you helped us out by putting the house in a trust we can manage together." I asked, "Together with who?" He shrugged. "With me. With the family." "With the family," I repeated. That was how they phrased it when they wanted something from me. Not give us, help the family, not your money, the family's future, not your home, the family place. I told them no. The dinner got colder after that. Ethan pushed his food around his plate. Vanessa took a sip of wine and looked at me as if I had disappointed her in a way she had anticipated. After they left, I stood in the kitchen long after the dishes were done, staring at the porch light through the window. Helen's photograph sat on the counter beside the sink, and I remember saying aloud, "I think our boy has lost his way." The photograph, of course, said nothing back. But I started noticing other things after that. Things that were too small for anyone else to see and too large for me to ignore. Vanessa offered to handle my bills. Ethan asked to borrow my spare key. The envelope from my bank came opened once, then taped shut again. My reading glasses disappeared from the table and turned up in the hall closet. The bottle of my blood pressure medicine was half empty in the cabinet, when I knew for a fact I had only taken 2 doses that week. I did not accuse anyone. Not yet. Old men like me have learned the hard way that when you accuse the wrong person, they look wounded enough to make everyone else believe you are losing your mind. So I watched instead. I watched Ethan and Vanessa arrive together now, never separately, always with a reason. They brought groceries I had not asked for. They brought smiles that lasted only as long as I was in the room. They brought their son, my grandson, Ethan Jr., called Eli by everyone who loved him. Eli was 9 years old, with a shy grin and a mole on his left cheek that his mother always tried to cover with sunscreen and good manners. He loved baseball cards, grilled cheese, and hiding under the dining room table when adults talked too loudly. He also loved me. That mattered. When the rest of the room went cold, Eli still ran to my knees and wrapped his arms around me. When I told stories about the old days, he listened like they were treasure maps. One evening, after his mother had gone to answer a call in the backyard, Eli tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, why does Mom get mad every time I ask about the house?" I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean, buddy?" He lowered his voice. "She said this house is supposed to help our future. She said you should make the right choice before it gets taken away anyway." There are some sentences that sound like a child repeating grown-up poison without understanding the bottle it came from. That was one of them. I crouched down and looked him in the eye. "Eli, listen to me. This house is not going anywhere. Not while I'm alive." He nodded, but I could tell he was confused. Kids always know when the air in a room has changed, even if they don't know why. That night, I checked the spare medicine bottle again. 2 pills missing that I had not taken. I also noticed the lock on my desk drawer had been scratched. Something inside me shifted. I hired a locksmith the next morning and changed every lock in the house. I also bought a small body camera online after a friend from church told me older folks were being pressured and swindled in ways nobody talked about until it was too late. I did not tell Ethan or Vanessa. I did not tell anyone. I kept it in the top drawer of my bedside table and wore it when I had to meet them in private. I wish I could say I trusted my instincts from the very beginning. I did not. It took time for the truth to become ugly enough that I could finally admit what was happening. Then came the day Vanessa showed up with coffee. It was a Tuesday, rainy and gray, one of those afternoons when the whole sky feels like it has been wrung out over the neighborhood. She arrived alone, carrying a cardboard tray with 2 cups. "Ethan's tied up at work," she said, breezing into the kitchen as if she had every right to be there. "I thought I'd bring you a treat." "You didn't have to," I said. She set 1 cup near me and 1 beside her, then sat down without waiting to be invited. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." I looked at the cup. "I'm not much of a coffee drinker." "That's fine." Her smile never changed. "This one's decaf. Thought it might help you relax." I did not miss the emphasis on relax. We sat in silence for a moment. The rain ticked against the window. Her nails tapped once against the lid of her cup. Then she said, "You know, Daniel, we've been worried about your memory." I looked at her. She tilted her head. "Ethan says you've been forgetting appointments, misplacing things. The bank called about a couple unusual withdrawals." "That's funny," I said, "because I never made those withdrawals." Her expression stayed soft. "See? That's exactly what I mean." There it was, the trap. A smile sharp enough to cut. I leaned back in my chair. "What are you really doing here, Vanessa?" "Trying to help." "No," I said. "You're here because you think I'm stupid." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. "I think you're tired and a little confused. That happens." "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not confused." That's when she pushed the cup closer to me. "Just drink it," she said quietly. Something in her tone changed. The softness dropped away like a mask slipping off a hook. I did not touch the cup. Instead, I asked, "What's in it?" She stared at me for 1 long second, then smiled again, but this time the smile was thin. "Coffee." I reached for my own water glass instead. "Then you drink yours first." She laughed once too loudly. "You really do have a suspicious streak, don't you?" "Only when people come into my house and act like they're auditioning for a soap opera." Her hand tightened around the cup. I saw it. I saw the tiny white line of her knuckles. Then she said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That was the moment the alarm went off in my head. Loud and cold. Not a metaphor. My actual instincts. The feeling that something was very, very wrong. I stood up. So did she. The cup in her hand rattled slightly. A dark drop spilled over the lid and hit the tablecloth. "Sit back down," she said. I had seen enough men lose their lives for not listening to a warning in time. I had seen it in construction accidents, in bad roads, in the silence that comes before a collapse. I knew the look. It was the look of someone who had stopped pretending. I backed away 1 step. She said, "You don't need to make a scene." "A scene?" I repeated. "You show up with coffee in my kitchen, and you call it a scene?" The front door opened then. Ethan came in with the rain on his jacket. and a smile that died immediately when he saw our faces. "Dad," he said, "what's going on?" I looked at him. "Tell me what's in the coffee." He froze. And there it was again, that silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Recognition. Vanessa's face went calm in a terrible way. "You didn't tell him?" "Tell me what?" I snapped. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. "Dad, just sit down." That was the wrong thing to say. I heard footsteps upstairs. My grandson had been in his room, preparing for the weekend sleepover we had planned after school. Eli's head popped over the railing. "Grandpa? Mom? Dad?" Vanessa turned too quickly toward the stairs. "Eli, go back in your room." That alarm in my chest became a hammer. I moved between the hallway and the kitchen. Nobody's going anywhere until somebody tells me why my daughter-in-law is ordering me around in my own house. Ethan looked at Vanessa, and for a second I thought maybe he was going to stop this. Maybe he would finally choose the right side. Maybe he would say, "Sorry, Dad, she got carried away." Instead, he said, "We only wanted to make this easier." Easier. I have heard that word 1,000 times in my life. Easier is what people say when they want you to stop asking questions. Easier is what they say when they want your signature, your money, your silence. "What exactly are you making easier?" I asked. Ethan swallowed. "The transition." "What transition?" Vanessa exhaled through her nose, impatient now. "From managing your own affairs to having people who can actually do it properly." I stared at him. "You tried to drug me." "No," Ethan said quickly. "No, it's not. Don't lie to me." Vanessa folded her arms. "You know, this is exactly why we had concerns. Extreme paranoia, hostility, unpredictable behavior." The audacity of her nearly made me laugh. I looked directly at Ethan. "Did you know?" He did not answer. That was answer enough. Something inside me went still. Not broken. Still. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm tears the roof off. "I want both of you out of my house," I said. Vanessa smiled. Not kindly. Not at all kindly. "This isn't just your house anymore, Daniel." I felt my stomach tighten. "What did you say?" Ethan stepped forward. "Dad, please. Just listen. We've got paperwork ready. You're getting worked up, and this would be a lot smoother if you cooperated." "What paperwork?" Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I remember the weight of that moment more than any object in my life. The folder landed on the table with a dull thump, like a verdict. Inside were documents with my name printed neatly at the top. Transfer forms, authorization papers, medical evaluation requests, a proposed guardianship petition. Guardianship. They were trying to declare me incapable. My own son. My own daughter-in-law. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. "You plan to take my house and my decisions from me by calling me incompetent?" Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it again. Vanessa said, "If you sign, everyone gets what they need. No one has to make this ugly." "You mean no one has to make it public?" I said. That was the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Not guilt, fear. And in that instant, I knew something more was going on than a greedy son and a controlling wife. They were not just trying to take my house. They were trying to take it now, quickly, before something else happened, before someone else found out. I heard Eli come down the stairs. "Grandpa?" he called. Vanessa spun around. "Eli, go back upstairs." He stopped in the hallway, his little face pale. Why is everybody yelling? I will never forget the way he looked at his parents then. Children always know when adults are lying, even if they do not have the words for it. I pointed toward the door. "Out, both of you." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Dad, don't do this." "Me?" I said. "You came into my home with papers and whatever's in that cup, and you're telling me not to do this?" He glanced at the coffee tray like maybe it could still save him. That's when the first twist of the afternoon hit me. Eli walked slowly into the kitchen and looked at the tray. "Mom, why is there only one spoon?" Vanessa went still. I looked from him to the tray and then back at her. The second cup had been for Ethan. I understood then that this was never only about me. There was another plan. Another layer. Something even darker. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes on the cups. One had a blue sticky note on the lid. Mine. The other had no note. "Who was the second cup for?" I asked. No one answered. Ethan looked sick now. Truly sick. Vanessa's face sharpened into something hard and ugly. "Ethan," I said, "who was the other cup for?" He swallowed. "For me." I felt the air leave the room. They had not just brought one cup. They had brought two. I turned slowly back to Vanessa. "You were going to drug him too?" She did not deny it. Ethan looked at her in horror. "You said it would just make him calm down." Vanessa snapped. "Shut up." I had seen enough to know the whole rotten thing had started to splinter apart. I stepped away from the table and moved toward the hallway where my coat hung. My body camera was in my shirt pocket. I touched it without looking. "Everybody stay where you are," I said. Vanessa laughed, but there was panic in it now. "You think you're in control? I think you've already lost it." Ethan stepped toward me. "Dad, don't call anyone." "Why not?" "Because if you do, they'll take Eli." That stopped me. I turned back slowly. "What did you just say?" He looked at the floor. "Vanessa's father has lawyers. If this turns into a mess, they'll say the family is unstable. They'll say Eli's environment isn't safe." I stared at him. "You brought your child into this?" He lifted his head, eyes wet now, and for the first time I saw him not as the man who had turned on me, but as the boy who used to hide behind my legs at fireworks displays, because loud noises frightened him. He looked ashamed, weak, desperate, and still, he had come here. He had helped her. That was the part that hurt the most. I said, "You're telling me you were willing to drug your father so your wife's family could threaten custody of your son?" "I didn't know that part," he whispered. "Then you knew enough to be guilty." Vanessa slammed her cup on the table. "Enough of this. Daniel, listen carefully. You're going to sign the papers, and you're going to say you did it willingly because you're exhausted and want help. If you don't, we take the guardianship route. We already have the doctor lined up." I felt a cold rush under my skin. "What doctor?" She smiled, and I knew then she had been rehearsing that answer for days. "A very reasonable one." A very reasonable one. That phrase has haunted me ever since, because it was the phrase of a person who had turned cruelty into logistics. I looked at the folder again. There, tucked behind the signature pages, was a second document. A letter from a law office I did not know, stating that a review had been requested regarding the management of Helen's trust, with a motion to free certain assets pending family suitability assessment. They were not only after my house, they were after Helen's trust. That trust, the one meant for Eli. I asked, "Who signed this motion?" Vanessa's mouth tightened. She understood she had given herself away. "Tell me," I said. She crossed her arms. "A concerned party." "A concerned party is what you call yourself when you steal from a dead woman's legacy?" Ethan put a hand over his mouth, like he might be sick. Eli stood frozen by the doorway, his backpack slipping off one shoulder, watching all of it with eyes far too old for 9 years. The room began to feel smaller. The rain drummed on the windows. Somewhere in the living room, one of the birthday balloons scraped softly against the ceiling fan. I heard myself say, "Get out." Vanessa looked at Ethan, and I saw the whole marriage in that glance. Not love, not even affection. Strategy. She was deciding whether to cut him loose or drag him deeper. Then she said, "You think you can throw us out? This house is already half ours on paper." I nearly laughed. "Not unless you've forged more than coffee, Vanessa." That was the moment the game changed. Her face sharpened with a flash of pure anger. "You're not as clever as you think you are." "No," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But I'm apparently smarter than the people who left evidence sitting on my table." Her eyes flicked toward my chest. That tiny movement told me everything. She had noticed the camera. I did not move. Neither did she. The room went so still I could hear the furnace click on in the basement. Then Vanessa smiled again. But this time it was the smile of a cornered animal. "Fine," she said. "You want to play old man detective?"
Let's play.
She reached for the coffee cup and knocked it across the table. The cup hit the floor and shattered. The smell that came up from the carpet was sharp and bitter. Not like coffee at all. There was something medicinal under it. Something chemical. That was enough for me. That alone was enough. Ellie gasped. Ethan staggered back. Vanessa! She turned on him instantly. Don't start with me. You knew this was the only way. That is not what you said. You knew your father was going to ruin everything. I stared at them. So that's what this is. Not concern, not help. You want me gone because I won't hand over what Helen left for Eli. Vanessa lifted her chin. We want what's fair. Fair, I said. You drugged me and called it fair. She did not even blink. You're old. You're alone. You were going to die in this house and leave a mess behind. We were cleaning it up. Something inside me almost snapped right then. Not from fear, from fury. But before I could answer, Eli spoke up in a small, shaking voice. Mom? We all turned. He was looking at the broken cup on the floor, then at the camera on the shelf, then back at her. Did you do something to Grandpa's coffee? Vanessa's expression changed. Not much. Just enough. You need to go upstairs, she said. He shook his head. Eli, did you? He asked again, louder this time. The room held its breath. Vanessa said, This is adult business. You said that last time, Eli whispered, when you made me lie about the bank letter. Ethan whipped around. What bank letter? Vanessa's eyes closed for half a second. There it was. The second twist. The one she had not expected. My grandson had already seen part of this. I did not know then what bank letter he meant. I only knew that the child had just put a crack in the wall where they had built their lies. Ethan stared at her. What bank letter, Vanessa? She looked furious now. Truly furious. Not now. Tell me. Louder. Tell me now. The whole scene had gone wrong for her. You could see it in the way she shifted her weight, in the way she stopped controlling the room and started hunting for an exit. Eli said, I found it in your bag. Silence. Last week, he continued, his voice trembling. It said Grandpa's name and something about freezing things. I asked you what it was, and you told me not to repeat grown-up words. My heart dropped into my shoes. She had left evidence where a child could find it. Vanessa said very softly, Eli, that's enough. He shook his head, tears gathering now. You told me if Grandpa got stubborn, I had to be helpful. You said that was what good families did. Ethan turned as white as paper. I looked at my son, and for the first time he seemed to understand that his wife had used their child as a shield. What did she tell him? I asked. Ethan's lips parted, but nothing came out. Vanessa recovered quickly. He's confused. He doesn't understand what he's saying. Because he's 9, I said. Not because he's lying. She moved toward Eli. Go upstairs, right now. He backed up instead. That was when my grandson did the bravest thing I had seen in years. He grabbed his phone from his pocket and held it up with both hands. I already sent the video to Grandma June. Vanessa went still. Your sister? Ethan said. Eli nodded, crying now, but stubborn through it. She said if anything weird happened, I should tell her. She said Grandpa shouldn't be alone with people who lie. My niece June, smart girl, accountant, always suspicious of everyone, which I used to tease her about. Vanessa's face drained. Video, she said. Eli nodded again. I recorded the party setup because you said I could make birthday memories. I left the phone on the shelf with the camera thing. I looked up at the shelf. My grandson's little temporary birthday camera was there too, blinking red. Not only had the room been recorded, the whole thing had been live-streamed to his phone backup cloud, the one June had helped set up for him months earlier after he lost a tablet. Vanessa did not know that. I did, and so did June, because by the time I heard the first siren outside, she had already called the police. Now the room changed in a new way. Not just fear, consequence. Ethan looked from Eli to Vanessa, then to me. You recorded this? I didn't know I'd need to, I said. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward the front door. Too late. She heard the siren, too. She ran. Not toward the back. Not toward the stairs. Toward the hallway. Toward the side door by the mudroom, moving fast enough that the heels of her shoes slapped hard against the hardwood floor. I moved, too. I was not young, but I was not helpless either. I caught her wrist just long enough to slow her down, and she jerked against me with surprising strength. "Let go," she hissed. "Not until the police get here," I said. She tried to twist free. Her nails raked my hand. Ethan reached us and grabbed her shoulder. "Stop!" he shouted. "Stop, Vanessa!" She shoved him hard enough to send him stumbling into the wall. That was when he finally saw her clearly, not as his wife, but as the person who had turned their home into a crime scene. The front door banged open and 2 officers entered, followed by June, rain-damp and furious, with a phone in her hand. I never forgot the sight of her. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who would arrive with the truth, and no patience for excuses. "Dad!" she yelled, rushing to me first. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my pulse was racing. "Get Eli away from this." She already had him in her arms. One officer looked from the shattered cup on the floor to the table full of paperwork to the faces of my son and daughter-in-law. "We got a call about possible elder abuse and attempted drugging. Who handed this man the coffee?" No one answered. The officer's eyes narrowed. I asked a question. June held up her phone. "There's video. Audio, too." Vanessa made a sharp sound like a laugh and a sob collided. "You can't prove anything from a kid's birthday party." The officer said, "Ma'am, I'd be careful about what you say next." That was when Ethan collapsed. Not physically, emotionally. He put both hands on his knees and started crying in a way I had not heard since he was a teenager who had broken his leg falling off a bike and thought he had ruined his whole life. "I didn't want this," he kept saying. "I didn't know it was going this far." Vanessa snapped. "Oh, spare me." Ethan looked up at her with pure disbelief. "You told me he was fading. You said all we had to do was get the papers signed before the trust review. There was no time. There was time to drug him. It was supposed to be mild. Mild. That word will always disgust me now." The officer stepped between them. "Hands where I can see them." Vanessa put her hands up, but not before shooting me one last look. It was not apology. It was not shame. It was hate, clean and bright. I will say this for people like Vanessa. They do not suffer bravely. They only rage when their cover is gone. They took her that night. They took Ethan too, though not in cuffs. Not then. He was questioned for hours. June stayed with Eli in the patrol car until Child Services could make temporary arrangements, though I insisted over and over that the boy should be with family. I would not let him be shuffled around like a package. That night, the house that had held so much love suddenly felt haunted by the sound of police radios and the smell of spilled coffee. The birthday balloons still floated in the corner, like they had no idea the day had become something else entirely. Eli asked me with tears in his eyes, "Grandpa, are you mad at me?" I nearly broke right there. I took his little face in my hands. "Nobody. Never," he sniffed. "I thought if I told someone, Mom would be mad forever." "She's the one who made the bad choice," I said. "Not you." Dad looked scared. "I know. Are they going to break up?" I looked at him carefully. A 9-year-old should not have to ask a question like that, but this is the world adults make and then ask children to inherit. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But none of this is your fault." He leaned against me and cried until his little shoulders were shaking. And then, somewhere in the middle of all that sorrow, I made a promise to myself. This family was going to stop eating itself alive around this boy. The investigation moved quickly after that. Fast is what happens when there is actual evidence, and one of the people involved has been foolish enough to record the whole thing. The camera on the shelf had caught everything. Vanessa offering the coffee, Ethan hesitating, the papers on the table, the conversation about guardianship, the reference to the trust freeze, the way Vanessa tried to order Eli upstairs, the part where she said the coffee would make me calm. It also recorded something I had not even noticed in the moment. When Vanessa first handed me the cup, she whispered, "You only need a few sips." A few sips. That was all the prosecutors needed to know, that this was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, not a bad joke gone too far. It was a plan. The lab later confirmed the drink had been laced with a sedative and something meant to interact badly with my blood pressure medicine. Not enough to kill me outright. Enough to weaken me. Enough to make me dizzy, confused, and pliable. Pliable. Another word that makes my skin crawl. The motion to freeze the trust turned out to have been based on false claims and forged signatures. The doctor Vanessa said had been reasonable, had been willing to sign off only after receiving misleading documents prepared by her father's law office. The truth came out piece by piece. Vanessa had not simply wanted my house. Her family had debts, serious ones. Her father's business was bleeding money. A bad expansion, a hidden loan, a pile of overdue payments, and one ugly tax problem after another. Ethan had signed a few things he didn't understand because Vanessa told him it was temporary and because he was desperate to keep up with the life she had convinced him they were entitled to. They were going to take Helen's trust, sell the house, and use the proceeds to plug holes in her father's company before the whole thing collapsed. And the guardianship petition? That was the key. If they could label me unable to manage myself, they could control the assets faster and make any objections look like the ranting of an elderly man who no longer knew what he was doing. That was the real inheritance theft, not the coffee. The coffee was merely the mechanism. When I learned all that, I did not feel triumphant. I felt sick, because through all of it, my son had not been the mastermind. He had been weak, selfish, frightened, and willing to go along with evil, because it wore a familiar face at his kitchen table every morning. That did not make him innocent. It made him pathetic. And sometimes pathetic is just dangerous wearing a softer coat. Ethan was charged first with aiding financial fraud and elder exploitation. Vanessa faced more serious charges for the drugging attempt, forgery, and fraud conspiracy. Her father's firm got dragged into the investigation too. Once the bank records were pulled, the whole rotten structure came apart, with the ugly speed of a house on fire. The day they arraigned Vanessa, she looked different, not ashamed, just exposed. The courtroom lights washed the polish off her face. She had no coffee cup, no camera to manipulate, no polite smile to hide behind. She looked like what she was, a woman who had gambled on cruelty and lost. Ethan looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He kept staring at the floor like if he looked up, he might see the life he had destroyed reflected back at him. After the hearing, he asked to speak to me. I almost refused. Then I remembered the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them gold flowers. I remembered the son who once cried because he thought he had disappointed me by bringing home a B on a math test. I remembered the version of him that still existed somewhere under all that cowardice. So I met him in a quiet room at the courthouse. He could barely look at me. "I'm sorry," he said. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You say that like it covers a lot." His shoulders folded in. "I know it doesn't." "No, you don't," I said. "You helped your wife drug me. You helped her threaten your son's future. You stood in my kitchen while I was almost made into a patient and a prisoner in my own home." He nodded without defending himself. "That's not just a bad decision, Ethan. That's betrayal." His face crumpled. "I thought it would just make you sign. I thought she was exaggerating." "You thought wrong, I know." I stared at him for a long moment. He had my eyes, Helen's hands, my father's stubborn chin. It hurt to see the family in him and know how little it protected him from becoming a stranger. He whispered, "She said if I didn't help, she'd leave and take Eli with her. She said her father could make people disappear in court." "That's how she got you," I said quietly. "Fear, shame, vanity. You wanted to believe. You were still the kind of man who could keep your family together." He started crying again. "I ruined everything." "Yes," I said. "You did." That truth landed hard between us. Then I added, "But Eli doesn't deserve to lose both his parents in one night." He looked up for the first time. I continued, "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell the truth. All of it. You're going to cooperate. You're going to accept whatever consequences come. And if there is any chance at all of being the kind of father your son can still respect one day, you're going to work for it. Every day." He nodded, over and over, like a child being given instructions he had not earned. I should tell you, I forgave him then. I did not. Forgiveness is not something you hand out because the room gets emotional. It comes later, maybe, if it comes at all. It comes after apologies have had time to prove whether they mean anything. It comes after the wreckage has been cleared, and the dust has settled enough to see what remains. I was angry for a long time, angrier than I expected to be. But anger can be useful when it keeps you from pretending. The court froze the trust and appointed an independent fiduciary to manage Helen's assets until Eli turned 18. The house remained mine. The forged documents were thrown out. Vanessa's family company went under once the banks pulled their support, and the accounting mess became public. Her father lost 2 major properties. Her mother, who had always smiled like she was above the fray, suddenly discovered she was not above subpoenas. As for Vanessa, she did not get to call her actions a misunderstanding in front of a judge. That was the first kind of justice. The second kind was quieter. It came in a kitchen that no longer smelled like fear. It came when June and I sat at the table with Eli and painted over the old stain where the coffee had spilled, then replaced the broken tablecloth with a bright blue one the boy had picked out himself. It came when we moved one of Helen's old recipe cards into a frame and hung it by the stove so she would still be there in the small way families stay alive through memory. It came when Eli began sleeping over again, slowly at first, then more often. He laughed again. He started asking questions again. He began telling me about school without looking over his shoulder. And it came, most surprisingly, in the months after the court case, when Ethan was placed on probation, ordered into counseling, and given supervised visitation only until he could prove he deserved more. That was not enough to fix him. It was enough to keep him from pretending. A year passed. Then another. People in town stopped whispering eventually. That is the gift and curse of small communities. They talk when the wound is fresh, then move on when they find another story to chew on. But the people living inside the story are left to clean the mess long after everyone else has forgotten the smell. I sold part of the acreage behind the house and used the money to build a small workshop for Eli and me. He wanted to learn woodworking, said he liked making things that don't lie. I told him that was a pretty wise thing to say for a kid his age. He grinned and said, "I heard you say it first." He had. That child got more of Helen in him every day. He also got some of the best parts of Ethan before life sanded them down. Sensitive, creative, curious, but there was something else in him too now, something steadier. He had seen adults fail him and still chosen not to become cruel. That matters. It matters more than people think. One afternoon, about 2 years after the party, Ethan showed up alone. No Vanessa, no polished plan, no expensive watch. Just a man carrying a paper bag and looking like someone who had spent too long staring at his own ruin. He asked if he could sit on the porch. I said yes. We sat for a while without speaking. The maples were turning gold. Eli was in the backyard with a stack of boards and a hammer, building what he insisted was either a birdhouse or a very small fortress, depending on his mood. Ethan said, "He talks to me now." I didn't answer. He swallowed. "Not about everything, but enough." "Good." He asked if I knew what I was doing. I looked at him. And I told him the truth, which I suppose was a start. He kept his eyes on the yard. "He doesn't hate me." "No," I said, "but he's not stupid." A bitter smile flickered across his face and died. "I deserve that." "You deserve worse," I said. He nodded. "I know." We sat again. The screen door creaked behind us. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I could hear Eli singing to himself while he worked, a tuneless little thing that made the whole yard feel less haunted. Finally, Ethan said, "I was jealous of you." That surprised me. He rushed on before I could respond. Not just of the house, of how he looked at you, Eli. He trusted you. He listened to you. I kept feeling like I had to compete with that, like I was failing at being a father because you were so good at it. I stared at him. He continued, Vanessa hated that I wanted your approval. She said you were controlling, that you made me feel small. Maybe some of that was true, but mostly she just wanted me on her side. I leaned back in my chair and let that sit there. There it was. Not an excuse, not a pardon. Just the truth, finally. Late and ugly and inadequate, but real. I said, Your mother used to tell me being a father was never about winning. It was about showing up. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. You didn't show up when it mattered most. No, that could have been the end of it. Maybe it should have been. But life is messy. And mercy is not the same thing as forgetfulness. So I told him, the only thing I could honestly offer. You get to keep trying with your son, I said. That's all. No promises beyond that. His throat moved. Thank you. I almost corrected him. It wasn't thanks. It was opportunity. But I held it back. Because he looked so tired. Because he was still my son. Because some injuries should not be ignored just because the person who caused them is finally bleeding too. When he left, I watched him drive away and thought about how strange justice is. People imagine revenge as the satisfying thing. They imagine someone gets caught, someone cries, someone is punished, and then the world feels right again. It does not work that way. Revenge, if you can even call it that, is hollow. It tastes like metal. It keeps you awake at night and teaches you to count losses like coins. Justice is different. Justice is when the lies stop working. Justice is when the room is finally bright enough to see what was hidden in it. Justice is when the people who believed they could poison a family and walk away discover that cameras, memory, and truth have longer lives than arrogance. And redemption? Redemption is slower than all of it. Redemption is a boy who learns to tell the truth before he becomes a man who tells lies. Redemption is a son who is forced to face what he became and either collapse under it or spend the rest of his life trying to be better. Redemption is a grandfather choosing not to turn bitterness into inheritance. I won't tell you I became a saint. I didn't. Some nights I still sit in my chair by the window and think about that coffee cup hitting the floor. I still hear the sound in my head sometimes, the crack of porcelain and the hush that followed. I still remember the look on Vanessa's face when she realized she had been recorded. I still feel the anger when I think about how close she came to making me disappear inside my own home. But then I hear Eli laughing in the yard, or I see Helen's recipe card on the wall, or I smell sawdust from the workshop and remember that something good survived. That's the part people miss. Bad people can make a lot of noise. They can burn a lot down. They can turn family members against one another and call it practicality. They can sit at your table and smile while plotting how to take what you built with your own hands. But they do not get the final word unless you hand it to them. At Eli's 11th birthday, we held the party in the same house, but it felt different this time. There were no hidden papers, no staged smiles, no suspicious coffee. Just cake, too many balloons, a backyard full of loud kids, and June keeping an eye on the grill because she still thinks she's in charge of every gathering she attends. Eli made one request before opening presents. He asked if he could say something. Everyone quieted down. He stood there in the middle of the living room, skinny legs and jeans, a little taller than last year, and looked around the room like he understood it all in a way children usually do not. Then he said, "This house used to feel sad. Now it feels like us." Nobody spoke for a second. Then I had to look away because my eyes were suddenly burning. He turned to me and grinned that crooked grin of his. "Grandpa, you taught me that family is supposed to be safe. I put one hand on his shoulder. That's right, buddy. And if it's not, you tell the truth. Yes, I said, my voice rough. You tell the truth. He nodded like he was memorizing it. That night, after the guests were gone and the wrapping paper had been picked up and the last candle was blown out, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of black coffee in my hand. Real coffee this time. No sedatives, no games, no hidden meanings, just coffee. The camera on the shelf was still there too, though now it mostly recorded ordinary things. Birthday songs, arguments about chores, Eli practicing guitar badly, June stealing cookies from the pantry, sunlight moving across the floorboards, my wife, once polished by hand. I looked out into the dark yard and felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly. Peace is too neat for a life like mine. Something steadier than peace. Acceptance, maybe. Or the understanding that betrayal can scar a family, but it does not have to erase every good thing that came before it. I lifted the cup, took a slow sip, and thought of the night everything broke open. The laughter, the cup, the camera, the lie that thought it could survive being seen. It could not. And that, in the end, is what saved me. Not luck, not strength, not even revenge. A camera recorded everything. And when the truth finally came to light, the people who tried to bury me were the ones who ended up exposed. As for me, I kept the house. I kept my grandson. I kept my name. For a while, I believed that was the end of it. The coffee had been tested. The recordings had been played. The police reports had been filed. Vanessa was gone from my house. My son was being dragged through the slow machinery of the courts, and my grandson was finally sleeping through the night again. It would have been comforting to say that once the lie was exposed, life settled down neatly, like dust after a storm. That is not how it happened. The truth does not always arrive as one clean blow. Sometimes it comes in layers, and every layer has its own poison. About 3 weeks after the birthday party, I got a call from June. Her voice was tight when she said, "Uncle Daniel, I found something." I was in the garage at the time, sanding down a little oak shelf for Eli's room. The phone pressed against my shoulder, sawdust on my hands, the smell of wood in the air. "Found what?" "A box." She paused. "In Mom's attic." June was my late wife's sister's daughter, but over the years, she had become more like the daughter I never had. Smart, direct, impossible to fool. The kind of woman who could spot a lie by the shape of your eyebrows. "What box?" I asked. "It was hidden behind the old Christmas bins. I only found it because I was looking for a photo album." I straightened slowly. "What's inside?" There was a small silence before she answered. "Letters," she said, "and one of them has your wife's handwriting." The saw in my hand went still. Helen had been gone 3 years by then, but the sight of her handwriting still had the power to pull the floor out from under me. "Bring it over," I said. June came that evening with a cardboard box wrapped in an old towel. Eli was at a friend's house, so it was just the two of us in the kitchen. She placed it on the table with almost ceremonial care and said, "I don't think you're going to like this." That was a bad sign coming from June. She usually underplayed everything. I opened the box. Inside were 3 envelopes, a small spiral notebook, and a bundle of receipts tied with string. The top letter was addressed to me in Helen's familiar slanted handwriting, dated almost a year before she passed. I did not open it right away. I sat there looking at the envelope while my hand started to shake. June sat across from me, silent, giving me the kind of space only someone who loves you knows how to offer. Finally, I broke the seal. "Danielle, if you are reading this, then one of 2 things has happened. Either I was right to be worried, or I worried myself sick over nothing, which would honestly be a relief. Do not get angry before you finish. You have always hated that I could read people faster than you could. But this is one of those times when being right may save us from something ugly. I have noticed things. Small things. Missing papers. Strange calls. Vanessa asking too many questions about the trust. Ethan dodging simple answers. I hope I am mistaken. I pray I am. But I am writing this because if I am not, I want there to be a record that someone saw the warning signs. The letter went on for nearly 2 pages. Helen had done what Helen always did when she felt danger in the room. She made a plan. Quietly. Carefully. She had spoken to a lawyer before her illness worsened. Not because she feared death, but because she feared what greed could do to the living once grief opened the door. The trust had been structured to protect Eli from exactly the kind of manipulation Vanessa had tried to pull. But Helen had also added another safeguard. If anyone tried to force a guardianship or exploit my health, a separate review would be triggered automatically. She had built a trap for the people who thought they were smarter than family history. I read that line 3 times. June looked up. There's more. There was. The notebook contained copies of conversations Helen had logged. Not verbatim, but enough. Dates. Names. A note about Vanessa asking who would inherit the house if I ever lost my faculties. A note about Ethan sounding uneasy, but not yet lost. A note about a man named Victor Hale, Vanessa's father's attorney, who had come to dinner once and spent 20 minutes talking about asset protection in a way that made Helen's skin crawl. At the bottom of the final page, Helen had written something that made me have to put the paper down. If they ever try to tell you I was imagining things, Daniel, do not let them win that version of the story. I sat back in my chair so hard it scraped against the floor. For a while, neither June nor I said anything. Then she whispered, She knew. Yes, I said. She really knew. I think she knew enough. That changed something in me. Not my grief, not my anger, but the shape of both. Because until then, part of me had been tormented by the idea that maybe I had missed something, that maybe I had been too trusting, too slow, too blind. Helen's letter told me the truth I needed most. I had not been imagining it. I had been outnumbered by people willing to lie. June touched the edge of the notebook. The lawyer says these notes and letters can help with the civil case. There's more of a case? I asked. She gave a short, humorless laugh. There's always more of a case when people lie this badly. By then, the legal side of everything had become its own exhausting weather system. The criminal charges were one storm. The financial lawsuits were another. Then came the civil claims, the property disputes, the trust audits, and the avalanche of motions from Vanessa's family trying to claw back control over what they had already lost. It turned out her father had been hiding money through shell accounts and fake vendor invoices. Her mother had signed off on expense records they swore were never real. Ethan, to his credit, did one thing right at last. He told the truth about the day he brought the papers to my house, the days before that, the emails, the pressure, the lies Vanessa fed him about protecting the family and keeping the inheritance clean. He did not do it because he was noble. He did it because the walls were closing in, and for the first time in his life, he had nowhere left to hide. That is not the same thing as redemption, but it can be the beginning of it. I learned things during that time I had never wanted to know. For example, Vanessa had been planning for months, maybe longer. The coffee was not the first attempt. There had been smaller things. Misplaced medication, a confused appointment with a memory specialist that Ethan had scheduled without telling me, a document she had slipped into a stack of bank letters that would have authorized a joint account transfer if I had signed it without reading carefully. It made my stomach turn to think how many narrow escapes had passed before I noticed the shape of the trap. And all the while, Eli had been in the middle of it, hearing fragments, seeing pieces, carrying adult secrets he should never have been given. One night, he climbed into the chair beside me and asked, "Grandpa, are bad people born bad?" I looked at him. He was curled up in my old flannel blanket, hair still damp from the bath, a cereal bar crumbling in his hand. The question was quiet, but I knew it had been living in his mind for a while. "No," I said carefully. "Most of the time, people choose bad things, bit by bit. Sometimes they start small. Sometimes they keep making excuses. But it's still a choice." He thought about that. "Then Dad chose wrong a lot." "Yes," I said. He lowered his eyes. "Do you think he can choose right now?" That was the hardest question he could have asked me, because the truthful answer was, maybe. But maybe does not keep a child safe. Maybe does not undo what happened. Maybe does not restore trust. I put my hand over his. "I think he can try," I said. "That's all anyone gets to do after they've broken something important." Eli nodded slowly, and I could see him storing that away for later. Children do that. They store adult wisdom in odd corners of their heart and pull it out years later when they need it. The court eventually approved supervised visits between Ethan and Eli, but only after counseling, financial disclosure, and a full review of whether he had manipulated any of the trust documents. He hated the restrictions. I could tell. But hating consequences is not the same as understanding them. During one of those visits, he brought Eli a model airplane kit and a bag of marbles. Eli accepted the kit and set the marbles on the table without much interest. Ethan sat there for a while, then said, "I know I can't fix it fast." Eli did not answer. "I know I probably can't fix it at all," Ethan added. That made my grandson look up. "I just want you to know," Ethan said, voice rough, "that I'm not asking you to pretend I didn't do it. I'm just asking for a chance to be better than what I was." Eli studied him with a seriousness that made him look older than 9. Finally, he said, "Then stop talking and be better." I almost smiled. Ethan did smile, though it hurt. Fair. That became the rule after that. Less talking, more doing. He showed up on time. He paid what he owed. He stopped making excuses. He worked long shifts at a warehouse instead of chasing quick money. He cut ties with the people who had pulled him into the mess, including the relatives who had told him he was doing what had to be done. He was still my son, which meant I still wanted to believe he could become someone worth trusting again. But trust, once cracked, does not become new. It becomes something else, something repaired, visible, stronger in some places, weaker in others, honest about its damage. That was enough for now. As for Vanessa, her world collapsed exactly the way people like her never think it will. Not all at once, piece by piece. Her father's business went under. The court froze his assets. Their lawyers abandoned them once the emails and financial records became public. Vanessa tried to bargain, then tried to blame Ethan, then tried to claim I had misunderstood everything because of my age. That last part was a mistake. The judge did not appreciate it. Neither did the jury. When the criminal case finally went to trial, the video from Eli's birthday was played in full. The room was silent through most of it. Silent when Vanessa said, "You only need a few sips." Silent when Ethan admitted he knew the plan. Silent when the officer asked who had handed me the coffee. Silent when my grandson's voice came through the recording, small and frightened, asking if Mom had done something to Grandpa's coffee. There are moments when a courtroom feels less like a place of law and more like a place where the lies finally run out of air. That was one of them. Vanessa was convicted. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I enjoyed watching her face drain when the verdict was read. I did not enjoy any of it. I felt relief. That was all. Relief that the story she had tried to write about me would not be the one people remembered. Relief that my grandson would have a record, not a rumor. Relief that Helen's careful planning had protected what mattered. Relief that the truth, however late, had been strong enough to stand up in public. After the trial, I found one more envelope tucked inside Helen's notebook. It was addressed to Eli. I nearly did not open it. It did not feel right to read a letter meant for him, but I knew he was too young to carry that kind of thing alone. And if Helen had written it, she had written it with purpose. So I sat with him at the kitchen table and opened it together. Inside was a short note. My sweet boy, if life ever gets too confusing, remember this. Love does not ask you to lie. Family does not ask you to be small. And the people who are safest to trust are the ones who make the truth easier, not harder. Be kind, be brave, be honest. And when you build something with your hands, make sure it is strong enough to last. Love always. Great-Grandma Helen. Eli read it twice, without speaking. Then he folded it carefully and said, "She sounds like she knew me." I smiled through the ache in my chest. "She would have loved you." He nodded, eyes shining. "I know." There are lines in a life that mark the place before and after. For me, that letter was one of them. The birthday party had been the night my family tried to poison me. But the letter was the night my wife reminded us all that love, when it is built properly, can outlast even the ugliest betrayal. Years later, people still ask me whether I hate Vanessa. The honest answer is no. Hate is too active for what remains. What I feel is something quieter and maybe heavier. A deep sadness for how greed can hollow out a person until all that's left is strategy and appetite. I feel anger, of course. I feel disappointment in Ethan, even now, because some wounds do not vanish just because the person who caused them is sorry. But I also feel gratitude. Gratitude that Eli saw enough to tell the truth. Gratitude that June listened when I needed her. Gratitude that Helen left behind not just a house, but a blueprint for protecting the people she loved. Gratitude that the camera on the shelf recorded exactly what it needed to record. Most of all, I am grateful that the worst people in my life did not get to decide the final meaning of my story. They wanted me weak. I was watched. They wanted me confused. I was prepared. They wanted me isolated. I was surrounded by the right people at the right moment. And they wanted my grandson to inherit silence. Instead, he inherited the truth. That is the part I hold on to now. Not the coffee. Not the papers. Not the courtroom. Not even the revenge. If you can call consequences revenge. I hold on to the moment Eli stood in that kitchen with tears in his eyes and a phone in his hand and chose honesty over fear. That moment saved me. Maybe it saved him too, because a family can survive a betrayal only if somebody in it decides the lie stops here. In our house, that somebody was a child. And by the time the cameras caught the rest, the truth was already too late for the people who tried to bury it. For a long time after that, I thought the story was finished. People around town did too. They heard the verdict, nodded their heads, whispered for a few weeks, and then moved on to the next tragedy, the next scandal, the next thing that made them feel lucky it had happened to someone else. That is what communities do when the worst is over. They fold the pain up, put it back on a shelf, and call it history. But history has a way of breathing, especially in a family like mine. The first sign that the story was not over came in the spring, when a letter arrived at my house with no return address. It was thick, cream-colored, and looked expensive in the way bad news often does. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a minute before opening it. Inside was a handwritten apology. Not from Vanessa, not from Ethan, from her mother. I read the first line twice because I thought I had misunderstood it. Daniel, I owe you the truth, even if you never forgive me for it. The letter went on to describe a meeting she had had with Vanessa months before the birthday party. She wrote about the plans to move money, the pressure from her husband's failing business, the fear they had all carried about exposure, and the moment she realized Vanessa was no longer trying to save the family, but trying to survive the collapse of her own lies by using mine as cover. She admitted something else, too. She had known about the coffee. Not the exact formula, not the exact timing, but enough to understand that Vanessa had meant to make me easier to control. Enough to understand that when she said nothing, she became part of it. I sat at the table with the letter in my hands and felt something I had not expected to feel. Not surprise, not even anger, weariness. The kind that comes when too many people have spent too long pretending they did not know what they were doing. That evening, I read the letter again, this time with June beside me. She shook her head once and said, "She waited until after the damage was done." I nodded. "Why now?" she asked. "Because now it costs her less." June gave a short laugh that was almost bitter. "That's the most honest thing anybody has said in this family in months." She was not wrong. I kept the letter, not because I trusted it, but because I wanted the record. If I had learned anything, it was that truth was a fragile thing unless someone kept it in writing.